Elizabeth Holmes dropped out of Stanford at 19 with a dream, a tiny device that could run hundreds of medical tests from a single drop of blood. No needles, no labicids, just a quick finger prick, and you'd know everything about your health. Investors believed her. Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Rupert Murdoch, the Walton family, they poured nearly $1 billion into her company, Theranos. At its peak, it was valued at $9 billion, and Holmes was the youngest self-made female billionaire in history. There was just one problem: the technology never worked. Not once. And hundreds of thousands of patients received fake test results. Elizabeth Holmes grew up in Washington, D.C., the daughter of a government official and a congressional committee staffer. She was, by all accounts, brilliant and intensely ambitious. At 18, she enrolled at Stanford to study chemical engineering. In her freshman year, she approached her professor, Channing Robertson, with an idea for a patch that could test blood and deliver medication simultaneously. Robertson was impressed enough to become her mentor and later a Theranos board member. In 2003 and 19, Holmes dropped out of Stanford and founded Real-Time Cures, which she quickly renamed Theranos, a combination of therapy and diagnosis. She secured initial funding from Silicon Valley venture capitalists and family connections. The pitch was compelling. The blood testing industry was a $75 billion market dominated by two companies, Quest Diagnostics and Laboratory Corporation. Testing was slow, expensive, and required multiple vials of blood drawn from a vein. Holmes promised to disrupt all of it. Holmes modeled herself deliberately and visibly after Steve Jobs. She wore the same outfit every day, a black turtleneck. She spoke in a deep baritone voice that multiple former colleagues have said was artificially lowered. She designed the Theranos lab device, called the Edison, to look like an Apple product, sleek, white, minimalist. Everything about Theranos was designed to evoke the feeling of a Silicon Valley moonshot. And it worked on investors. Between 2004 and 2015, Theranos raised over $700 million from a roster of investors that reads like a who's who of American power. Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, board member. George Shultz, another former Secretary of State, board member. James Mattis, future Secretary of Defense, board member. Rupert Murdoch invested $125 million personally. The Walton family invested $150 million. The DeVos family invested $100 million. Notice something about that board? It's full of politicians, military leaders, and media moguls. There isn't a single scientist, doctor, or blood testing expert. This was by design. Holmes surrounded herself with powerful people who could open doors and lend credibility, but who had no ability to evaluate whether the technology actually worked. Here's what was actually happening inside Theranos. The Edison device, the proprietary blood testing machine that was supposed to run hundreds of tests from a single finger prick, couldn't do it. The technology was fundamentally flawed. Blood samples from a finger prick are tiny and prone to contamination. The volumes were too small to run many standard assays accurately. Theranos engineers tried for years to make it work and repeatedly failed. So the company cheated. When patients came to Theranos wellness centers, which were set up inside Walgreens stores starting in 2013, their samples were often not run on the Edison at all. Instead, Theranos secretly ran many tests on commercial machines made by Siemens, the German medical equipment manufacturer. But even these machines weren't being used properly. Theranos was diluting the tiny finger prick samples to create enough volume for machines designed for full vials of blood. The results were unreliable. Patients received test results that were wrong. Cancer screenings came back with false positives, sending patients in a panic. HIV tests came back with false negatives, giving infected patients a false sense of safety. Thyroid tests fluctuated wildly. One former employee testified that when Theranos ran its own tests side by side against commercial labs, the results frequently didn't match, and Theranos sent the inaccurate results to patients anyway. Internal whistleblowers tried to raise alarms. Erica Chung and Tyler Schultz, the grandson of board member George Schultz, went to regulators and journalists. Holmes responded with intimidation. She hired David Boies, one of the most powerful attorneys in America, and his firm sent threatening letters to employees, former employees, journalists, and anyone who questioned Theranos. Tyler Schultz's own grandfather reportedly pressured him to stay quiet to protect the company. The house of cards collapsed in October 2015 when Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou published a devastating investigation. His reporting revealed that Theranos was running most of its tests on third-party machines, that the Edison barely worked, and that patient results were unreliable. Holmes went on TV and denied everything, calling Carreyrou's reporting outright false. She did not stop the deception, but the evidence was overwhelming. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services inspected Theranos labs and found deficiencies that posed immediate jeopardy to patient health and safety. Theranos was forced to void 2 years of blood test results, tens of thousands of patient results, all declared invalid. Walgreens terminated the partnership. Investors fled. Partner companies severed ties. In June 2018, Elizabeth Holmes was indicted on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The trial, which began in September 2021, revealed a trove of internal evidence. Texts showing Holmes knew the technology didn't work, fake demonstrations given to investors using rigged machines, and revenue projections she showed to Walgreens and Pfizer that were entirely fabricated. Holmes had claimed Theranos was generating $100 million in revenue. The actual number was approximately $100,000. In January 2022, Holmes was found guilty on 4 counts of fraud. She was sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. She reported to prison in May 2023. Ramesh Sunny Balwani, her former boyfriend and Theranos COO, was convicted separately on all 12 counts against him and sentenced to nearly 13 years. So what can we learn from the most brazen fraud in Silicon Valley history? Lesson 1. Prestige is not due diligence. Theranos board included former secretaries of state and billionaire investors. None of them evaluated the technology. They trusted the narrative because other powerful people trusted the narrative. In investing and in business, always ask, has anyone with actual expertise in this domain verified the claims? If the answer is no, the prestige of the people involved is worthless. Lesson 2. Fake it till you make it has a line, and Theranos crossed it. Silicon Valley culture celebrates founders who project confidence beyond their current capability. But there's a difference between optimistic vision and outright deception. When fake demos, fabricated revenue numbers, and inaccurate patient results enter the picture, you've crossed from ambition into fraud. Lesson 3. Silencing critics is always a red flag. When a company spends more on lawyers threatening journalists than on fixing problems journalists identified, run. Holmes spent millions on legal intimidation. That money could have gone into actually developing the technology. The cover-up was the company's real operating model. Elizabeth Holmes is in federal prison. Theranos patients who received wrong test results are still dealing with the consequences. And the $700 million investors poured in? Gone. The lesson isn't just about Theranos. It's about what happens when we let a good story substitute for actual evidence. If you want more stories about billion-dollar business successes and failures, subscribe. I've got a new one every week.